boy.
Oh, my love. Mi dispiace. I was at the bank when they told me. Did I miss it? Am I too late? Give him here.
Giovanni.
Shh, my love. It will be all right. Tu sei un uditore. Sei un combattente. Perciò, combatti. Listen to him. A fine set of lungs.
And what shall we call him, my love?
Ezio. Ezio Auditore da Firenze.
Assassin's Creed 2 was released on November 17th, 2009 on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The third-person action-adventure was developed by Ubisoft Montreal and published by Ubisoft. Ubisoft Montreal is responsible for other titles such as Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, Far Cry 2, and also the prequel to this, Assassin's Creed 1. The following review is based on the remastered version on the PlayStation 4. Assassin's Creed 2 came with two other remasters in Assassin's Creed: The Ezio Collection. This collection was released on November 15th, 2016, about 7 years after the initial release. The footage you are seeing was recorded on a PlayStation 4 Pro via an Elgato. Assassin's Creed 2 begins with a recap by Desmond Miles, one of the two protagonists in Assassin's Creed 1. In Assassin's Creed 1, Desmond was essentially abducted by Abstergo Industries and forced to use a machine called the Animus. The Animus is a machine that allows a subject to live the memories of an ancestor via DNA. By the end of the game, Desmond finds out that throughout the history of mankind, there has been this secret war between the Assassins and the Templars. The Templars want peace, but a peace through complete control. The Assassins fight for a world of peace, but also for free will. Desmond eventually finds out Abstergo is just a front for the Templars, and that the Templars were using Desmond and his ancestor to find the pieces of Eden. These pieces of Eden are extraordinary relics with extraordinary power. And with such power, the Templars feel they can achieve their goals. Assassin's Creed ends with a map of one such relic being revealed. And then the sequel begins where the first one left off. Desmond is sat in his cold and colorless room of despair when Lucy, the woman who basically controlled the Animus while Desmond was under, breaks him out of Abstergo.
Abstergo's got some fucked up interior decorators.
Stay close.
Hey! You're not supposed to be up here! Open this door! I'm calling it in. We have a breach in the research wing. I repeat, there's been a breach in the research wing.
Nice walls.
Requesting backup.
Fancy. Wait.
There they are! Don't let them get away!
Together they flee to an assassin base where they meet two other allies. At this base, Desmond is once again put in the Animus, but this time, Lucy hopes that with the bleeding effect, Desmond can learn all the moves of his ancestor Ezio Auditore da Firenze. While in Assassin's Creed 1, Desmond lives the memories of an assassin during the Crusades. Now in Assassin's Creed 2, Desmond must live the memories of an assassin during the Italian Renaissance. Okay, so now, before I dive into the story, I'm going to start with the characters. Desmond is immediately unlikable. In the first game, he was a blank slate. He didn't know what was going on. He was just going through the motions as he figured things out. In this game, he starts off with, "I'm a prisoner of war," which is just really dramatic. He's a prisoner of war he didn't know about until like recently, and it's not like they were treating him like some piece of shit. If my folks separated and my dad kidnapped me and forced me to tell him what my mom was up to, I'd say I was kidnapped, but not that I was a prisoner of war, you know? During the escape, Desmond asks a lot of questions too. At face value, yeah, that makes sense. If you were being broken out, you'd have a lot of questions too. questions too. You know, who are you? Where are we going? What are we going to do when we get there? How are we going to get there? However, the problem I had was that Desmond didn't take into account the gravity of the situation. He was really lighthearted, and let's just say he wasn't funny, and he just came off really annoying. I mean, he's the character that either dies first or gets everybody in his group killed in a horror movie. Now, after the introduction, Desmond evolves into a generic character with no memorable features. And unfortunately, the generic design of his physical form, like his just the design of his character and his face, it doesn't really help. Lucy, the woman who helped Desmond break out, serves as the exposition delivery person. Desmond will ask questions and she will answer them. There is this air of like woe to her, but not enough to impact her dialogue, and certainly not enough to make her memorable. Just like Desmond, her character design does her no favors besides looking like Kristen Bell, who is already, I mean, she's a beautiful actress. But, I mean, come on. It's just a generic blonde girl with blue eyes. For those two leading the storyline outside the Animus, it really bothers me how lame these two are. Assassin's Creed 2 could have really built on these two. If this is really Desmond's story, as he claims at the beginning of the game, then there should have been more focus on him. Rather than wasting time on building the modern day world of assassins and Templars, it ought to have been spent on Desmond and Lucy specifically. Assassin's Creed 2 does a decent job building the universe outside the Animus, but it does no good when the characters in that universe are bland and boring. Joining Lucy and Desmond at the hideout are Sean and Rebecca. Sean serves as your encyclopedia within the Animus, giving you information on people, places, and events. Sean is basically Stephen Merchant. English, witty, intelligent, but at a certain point he just becomes somewhat irritating. Rebecca is the engineer with a technical know-it-all to keep the Animus working. She is smart and helpful in her attitude towards Desmond. Out of the four, Rebecca and Sean are the most interesting characters because they actually have personalities. Unfortunately, though, that's not saying much. To the casual player, though, this can all be forgiven because most of the game does take place in the Animus. Now, in the Animus, you play as Ezio Auditore da Firenze. In a nutshell, Ezio goes from being this young man delivering letters for his father, getting into fistfights, and sleeping around, to this young, talented assassin that has to go up against one of the most powerful people in Italy. I mean, that in of itself sounds like a remarkable journey, doesn't it? Well, it isn't, and Ezio as a character isn't all that wonderful. As a young man, he's womanizing and getting into trouble. After seeing his family hung by their necks in the town square, he's thrust onto the national stage, having to deal with his feelings of anger and revenge, but also has to keep his surviving family members alive. This is all fine and all up until it isn't. I mean, once you get out of the city right after your family's execution, you arrive at your Uncle Mario's villa. Initially, Ezio only hopes to rest for a bit before moving on with his family. He intends to, stay on the run. During his stay, Mario helps Ezio better his fighting skills while explaining to him the assassin-Templar situation. While Ezio is there, Mario locates one of the men responsible for the Auditore executions. Ezio catches up and kills him, angrily, as one would.
What are you and your allies planning? Is this what my father discovered? Is this why he was killed?
I'm sorry. Were you hoping for a confession?
Pezzo di merda! Vorrei solo che avessi sofferto di più! Hai avuto la fine che meritavi! Spero che
Enough, Ezio! Show some respect.
Respect? After all that's happened, do you think he would have shown either of us such kindness?
You are not Fieri. Do not become him. Che la morte ti dia le pace che cercavi. Requiesca in pace. Take this. Read it when you have the time. Our work here is finished.
Mario then simply says, "We're better than them. Show respect." Ever since then, Ezio shows nothing but respect for his enemies during their final moments. If you were really pissed off about your family getting killed, you wouldn't just turn it off like a switch. Eventually, this hunt for his family's killers becomes a hunt for Templars. But at the end, Ezio brings up his family again. So, although Ezio never forgot, the story makes us feel like we did. The further we go into the game, the less it's about his family's killers, and the more they are Templars and enemies of the people. All this because Ezio had shitty character development. I don't care about the honor, nobility, emotional neutrality of an assassin. I wanted to see Ezio struggle with those feelings of anger and revenge. I wanted to see that struggling transition of having to leave those feelings behind for the good of others. The game takes place over a span of a few years, usually jumping forward in time after a big event. While in theory, it's a great way to keep the story moving forward, in reality, it's rarely a success. I find it to be like if I were to tell you all the main points of a movie and then expect you to understand every element. One of my favorite movies of all time is 12 Years a Slave, directed by Steve McQueen. Let's say I tell you the story the way I have felt Assassin's Creed told its story. So, in the beginning, Solomon Northup is a free black man living in the South. He's an accomplished violinist. These two guys then hire him for a DC trip, only to drug him and sell him to a Southerner. And then first he goes to a slave owner named Ford. After a while, he's sold to a slave owner named Epps. And then Epps leases him to someone else before coming back to Epps. And then a construction worker named Bass listens to his story, calls the right authorities, and after 12 years, Solomon returns to his family and essentially returns to his life of freedom. Now, would the movie still be powerful and heart-wrenching if that was all it showed? If it hadn't shown all the little scenes in between? Would the impact be as deep and emotional if the movie moved so quickly, if we didn't know it had been 12 years? Now, I know it's risky and unfair to compare a game to movie, fiction to non-fiction. A half-decent game to one of the greatest and, if not my favorite, movie of all time. But I'm trying to compare just the storytelling of two works that use a similar formula of telling a narrative over a few years seamlessly. Assassin's Creed 2 could have shown much more intimacy with Ezio and better cultivated his relationships with literally every ally he meets. With so much time passing throughout Assassin's Creed 2, Ezio should have been shown to evolve a lot more. It should have shown him maturing and molding into his role of an assassin. From when his Uncle Mario tells him to respect his victims, he is literally the same person until the end. And with seamless transitions in time, you could easily assume this entire game took place in a month. Ezio is still the Assassin's Creed fan favorite as of August 2017. And granted, there are two other games he's in, but just based off the first game and second game, he is definitely the worst of the two. In Assassin's Creed 1, Altair lacked any personality, but at least we saw him grow. He started the game as a master assassin, fucked up, fought his way back up the ladder, and proved that, yeah, he's that damn good, and learned a few moral lessons on the way. Now, while outside the Animus, the two side characters are more interesting than the main character, the opposite is true inside the Animus. With the exception of Leonardo da Vinci, every side character in Assassin's Creed 2 is essentially a phantom. They are there, and then they disappear. Most of the side characters are just there to teach you new tricks or techniques. If your side characters can be easily replaced by a tutorial pop-up, then your side characters can't be all that great, can they? This is really a shame because these characters would have been perfect to show the evolution of Ezio throughout the events of Assassin's Creed 2. Rather than just teach you a technique or lead you to your next mission, these side characters could have given a lot more insight, or a little more, even just a little more insight into themselves, their philosophies, their choices to become an assassin, or at least their choices to become an ally to the assassin cause. The plot is not interesting. As I mentioned, it's just a hunt for the people that killed your family that eventually becomes a hunt for Templars. Every villain has his own big bad deed that's supposed to motivate you, but Those deeds felt familiar. The best thing I can say about the narrative was that it made sense. That's all I can really say. On the PlayStation 4, Assassin's Creed 2 looks no different than the original. It also seems to run no differently. The screen tearing can get pretty bad. For its time, Assassin's Creed 2 character models were decent. That remains unchanged here. My biggest praise in terms of visuals has to go to the setting. Venice and Florence look beautiful. Forlì looks fucking depressing. Yeah, I don't really have much to say in detail though. I actually don't have much to say about the audio either. Unlike in the future installment, Assassin's Creed Unity, where the French sounded English, in this game everyone has an underlying Italian accent in Italy. However, there's no emotional weight behind the delivery of any line in the game. So the voice acting isn't bad, but that lack of emotion is what keeps anyone from being memorable. Jesper Kyd, K-Y-D, he did the music for Assassin's Creed 2. He's also done music for Hitman Blood Money and Kane & Lynch. It's good and different. It's far from non-existent like other games where the music plays but it's so boring you don't even notice it. It's varied, it's orchestral. It's just good. The sound effects, they either hit home or they didn't. Sometimes the sound effects would just unsync with an action. You'd hear a punch land a half second before you actually see the action. The same with a kill with your hidden blade. Shing! And then you see, the stabbing. It's not game breaking though. I'm just sad that this problem is still in the remaster. Much like everything else, the gameplay is average. I didn't find it satisfying or a lot of fun. And everything you do, you feel like something is missing. This might be totally unfair, because the Assassin's Creed gameplay has been improving, and since I'm playing this after I've played future installments, I might come off a little biased. I think it's fair to say that time just didn't help the gameplay. My biggest problem, gameplay-wise, is that some missions asked you to be undetected, and in some of the missions, it's more difficult than it should be because those missions were constructed for a level of stealth capability the game just does not have. And that just made those missions infuriating. I mean, keep in mind that Ezio can only walk incredibly slowly or sprint. Another negative I had was the detection system, which was flawed. A little bar appears above an enemy when you are in his line of sight. When it fills to red completely, he will attack. The flaw is that this system seems to have a mind of its own. Sometimes the meter or the bar will fill slowly, other times fast, or just immediately just turn red. And I never understood why it was so varied. Because in restricted areas, sometimes the meter filled up slowly. In unrestricted areas, during free roam, sometimes that meter would fill so quickly, I didn't have a chance to do anything. Imagine the difficulties of that variation during story missions where you needed to remain undetected, where you can either only sprint or walk slowly. On the other hand, and the more positive side of the gameplay, is that it did improve from its predecessor in a few ways. Customization is now available, although not totally necessary. You can now purchase dyes for your clothes if you're a bit sick of the whites. You can also purchase better armor and equipment. Stronger armor will give you more health, while there are more options for weapons now. You can purchase some stronger but slower weapons like a warhammer, or faster but weaker weapons like, a small dagger. Or if you like to keep it simple, there are also balanced weapons, like a sword. Your equipment is also more varied as opposed to your bare bones loadout in the first game. You can now have things like a firearm, a set of double hidden blades, and smoke bombs. Those are just some of them. In a way, this also allows for a customized way to approach most missions. As I mentioned before, after Ezio's family is hung, Ezio seeks refuge at his uncle's villa. This place becomes a small RPG element in Assassin's Creed 2. You can purchase art to improve the property and order renovations for the small town around it. The more you invest into these small shops, the bigger the discount. The higher the value of the entire area, the more you make. Since this area becomes your biggest and constant source of revenue, you are encouraged to visit and invest often. There are also collectibles to lengthen your gameplay. One such collectible is essential to the story, and to unlock the final part of the game, you have to collect them all. It's made worthwhile by the fact that collecting a certain number of these certain collectibles gives you a permanent health boost. The rest of the collectibles are thankfully optional. I do have to praise the hidden symbol collectibles, in which you scan a symbol left by a previous user of the Animus, and when you scan it, each one has a small puzzle that has to be solved. And then solving these small puzzles unlocks a clip that's about a second long. The more you unlock, the clearer the video is. They were short, they were fun, interesting, and most importantly, they were not overwhelming. Gameplay-wise, on a PlayStation 4 controller, it felt good. I mean, sometimes it felt unresponsive, but I can't tell if that's just the remaster, it's just the game, or just me from having played, future installments. So, when it comes down to my conclusion, the story is bare bones and exhausting, in that I tried to really care, and I couldn't. The visuals and the audio are good. The gameplay sometimes feels more difficult than it should be, but besides those relatively few moments, it works, and it did improve in a few areas, since the first game. The length is there, which is good and bad. If you have no attachment like I did, the game will feel like it just drags on. However, it's good because you do get a lot of bang for your buck. Long story, several side missions, and collectibles. So if you bought this at full price, like I said, bang for your buck. There's really no new game plus or rewards for beating the game, so replayability is low. When you complete the story, though, you can go back and finish anything you might have missed if you really gave a shit. If you're looking to play the series as a whole, you can't miss this one. You just can't. If you're looking to have the same exact experience when you first got this game, look no further than this remaster. It's not even... I keep saying remaster throughout this entire review, but it's not a remaster. It's a fucking port. Anyways, besides that, Ezio, the story, nor the gameplay are really worth a recommendation of, you have to, you gotta play this. This is one of those games you just gotta play, even if you're not a fan of Assassin's Creed. Definitely not. This is definitely not worth that kind of recommendation. So for me, Assassin's Creed 2 gets a 5.5.
Va bene, I can do that.
Out of 10.
Ludovico.
And Gecko, at your service.
Basta! Where are my children? Let them go!
Of course, Signora. We'll happily give them back for something of yours. A certain map.
And a certain apple, brother.
See, a certain apple indeed. Or shall I slice your baby's necks ear to ear?
Bastardi! You think you can threaten me? I'll give you nothing! You want my children? Take them! I have the instrument to make more!